welcome to the afternoon panel. Lunch should be settling in, so we will try to be as energized and interesting as possible. And yeah, in fact, every panel I've seen has spent a considerable amount of time discussing big data in cloud. So there must be something going on here, right? So big data's cloud, the two buzzwords of probably the last several years to cause terrible confusion and great market opportunity. So let's put them together and see what comes out. First of all, let's introduce the panel. John gave me a very nice introduction. I'm going to let the panel introduce themselves, and I will start with my friend Michael Driscoll next to me.
Yes, thanks, John, and thanks to the organizers for having us here today. I'm Mike Driscoll. I'm the founder and CEO of Metamarkets, and we offer business analytics, cloud-backed, web-delivered as a service.
I'm Damien Katz. I'm CTO of Couchbase. Our product is about elastic databases, the ability to add machines into a cluster and expand the capacity, and also have machines fail and the cluster still runs. A lot of our customers are oriented around high throughput, low latency, and large users. We play primarily, our customers are more interested in the large user use case than they are the big data use case.
I'm McMichael. I'm the CEO of Infinigraph. We're a big data marketing analytics. Customers are obviously drowning in the physical amount of information they're having to process. And we have a platform as a service where we provide marketing departments with insight on what's trending in their industry and industry clustered information that helps them make marketing decisions and data support.
My name's David Sonnenschein. I'm from SAP, large enterprise application software company, in case you don't know. Recently, I think, making a big splash with our in-memory high-performance database called HANA. I think you've heard of a little bit today. So I'm part of the program that is the HANA outreach to startups, actually globally, responsible for the technical enablement of startups adopting the HANA platform.
Excellent. So there's a lot of compelling reasons to do big data in the cloud, and there's a lot of challenges to doing big data in the cloud. So I'll try and set up some questions that explore the balance of the good and the bad here. So Accenture, another little upstart you may have heard of, we have a few enterprise clients, and oftentimes the first thing they will say to you when you talk about the cloud is about data privacy and concern for the security of data up in the cloud. And yet, there's a lot of business going on in the cloud, and there's this other little company called Salesforce that seems to get people to put customer data in the cloud. So data privacy in the cloud. Let's start with Michael. What is it, a red herring? Is it real? What's going on here?
So I think it's definitely real, and I think that any software as a service company, anyone who's delivering services through the cloud would ignore it at their peril. I think it's reminiscent, though, of some of the concerns that people had at the beginning of the internet age. There was a time when people were so fearful of the public internet that you couldn't actually check any sites from within your office. I think, and there were a lot of companies that made a lot of money building, secure, lands that let you talk to the outside world through a little pinhole. I think that's shifted. Obviously, we all now have the public internet inside, Fortune 1000 companies. I think the same cultural shift will happen with the cloud. The real danger of the cloud, I think, is concentration of risk. So when companies have all of their data in silos, you have every Fortune 1000 firm has its own, back office. You didn't have the same risk of a breach that affects everyone, and that poses a certain perceptual problem. And I think the kinds of breaches that we're hearing about with Dropbox, I think recently JCPenney and others, may have leaked credit card information. We're going to see more of those, and that's not so much that the world is becoming less secure, but it's just the changing nature of how data is getting concentrated in places. So actually, if anything, we need not just the same security we had in the back office, we need actually even more security. So the onus, the threshold is higher I think, for security in the cloud than it was when we had a much more federated, fragmented world.
We're seeing, that the fact that the clients don't want to take on, like in my business, we aggregate massive amounts of unstructured data across the social graph. And they don't want to take that data on because it has all kinds of implications, nor do they want to put the infrastructure in place to even warehouse it. And to your point, I think it's important to note that the larger your data source you store inside, it becomes like a bank vault. It becomes more, from a hacker perspective, more tastier. Mm-hmm. Because, it's becoming a valuable asset. People find out about it. Your worst enemy is the guy internally that's the IT guy that knows a friend, and it's all on.
And from our perspective, obviously, we've dealt with a lot of data fragmented and not across the enterprise for years, and certainly security and privacy, security primarily from that perspective was a huge issue that we dealt with, and over time, what drove open some of that data to the cloud was what do you want to do with it? That you need to, in some cases, share it with partners, share it with customers as part of that engagement. And all of that, I think you still were sort of in fairly the traditional realm with data and just happened to be in the cloud or across the internet. But now when we really start getting individual profile kind of information where it's not a customer ID, but it's actually details about my life, is going into company A, B, and C, and is being shared between some of those companies, then I think the data privacy and the location and the source of the data and the chain of custody of the data is actually becoming a much bigger issue. And I think it's a real issue. As we're a German company, I can't have a conversation about data and inside a German company and not recognize that German data can't leave Germany, okay, by law, personal information. So it's an interesting challenge.
So, Damien, you have a database people can use up in the cloud, or they can spin it up in their own data center. Do you see a difference in the way people are using it there, or is privacy a concern of people when they're implementing your thing in the cloud?
So unfortunately, I don't really have a lot of insight into that, but I definitely think that this is going to become a differentiator for cloud providers is what sort of guarantees they can offer. So it's not just locking down your software, but you've now outsourced all your physical hardware to somebody, and you really need to be able to trust that they have all the procedures and security policies in place to keep you safe, because one rogue employee can easily lift all your data and you wouldn't know it. But yeah, right now most of our customers aren't really storing high value things like credit cards or people's personal information, so it's not as big an issue with us.
So we've got a couple businesses that started on the cloud here, and it's certainly, I've noticed, if you were under a rock, maybe you would miss this, but the cloud seems to have fundamentally opened up business and the ability to start a business in a way that wasn't there before. So Chase, you do a little bit of stuff on the cloud and have a business there.
Yeah.
What has the cloud done to make you able to bring some capability to bear that might have not been possible in the world where you had to spend $20 million in capital to buy a data center? Right?
Yeah, it was a great conversation we had prior, but personally for myself, I've spun up 4 data centers from Chase Manhattan Bank, Sprint PCS, you name it. We've been doing a lot of big data. I never called it big data before, so there's a lot of data. But
when you start calling it big data, then you ask for a 40% raise.
That's right. You want some marketing. You want to get more money. But personally, for myself, there was 2 things that were really a nexus that occurred. You had platforms out there that were opening up APIs, and that was huge. The low cost and bandwidth. The fact that just recently, a company of our size could not afford the physical hardware and the people to physically support it. And now we can. We run in rack space from both hosts. We have these in-memory arrays that we run on. And we just could not afford that physically to buy that. And the fact that we're able to put that up and in such a speed, and then the fact that we can access these APIs and just bring down this ridiculous amount of information, it's a game changer. So, for us, Infinigraph, creating an application enabling a marketer to, forget about all that. You don't need to think about any of that. And trying to solve a fundamental business problem, like help me understand what my customer's into. Real simple equation, but very difficult. It takes an army of analysts to do it. Well, we can do that now in seconds. We can tell them what they're into, what they're doing, what they're interacting with, what's relevant, what's trending in their industry. And that's huge. I couldn't have done that 3-4 years ago. It's been impossible. It would have been so cost prohibitive. And now we're able to rock this out and scale it on demand. It's phenomenal. And there's software coming out now that just, I just found out today that we wrote a C++ application. The guys that were Extreme already have it all. And I was like, gee. It's happening so fast right now. We're, really incredible technology is now going down to very low cost, is enabling these things to actually occur.
Yeah, I would say I think it's certainly the cloud is on par with, I think of 2 times in my life where I've had, moments of, wow, this changes everything. And the first time was in college in 1994. I installed Mosaic on a data, down in the basement of one of the computer rooms, and spent 12 hours surfing the web and thought, wow, this changes everything. And I fell asleep at some point. I started at 2 in the morning and I didn't finish till the next day. And the other experience was about 5 years ago, launching a couple of servers on Amazon and thinking, your mind goes through all the implications of, I just launched this virtualized bag of bits on the cloud that emulates an x86 server, and you sort of think about all of the implications of that, and you think, wow, this really changes everything. Fundamentally, I think it lowers, the capital intensity of computing, which in some ways, if you think about the printing press, it lowered the capital intensity of content distribution. I think there's something really powerful about that. I think the only thing that might come along in the next couple of decades that is similar is like microfabrication, right? Lowering the capital intensity of manufacturing. But it's a very powerful thing, and it means that entrepreneurs like ourselves, with the exception of David, just struggling to make a few $1 billion every year like the rest of us, it really lowers the cost of experimentation, and so you get a lot more cycles to try things and fail, and that's really what the cloud has done, I think.
So David, as the upstart, you've built a fantastic box full of memory, and that's a big hunk of metal.
Yeah.
And now you're able to expose that in the cloud. Maybe you and Chase want to talk about.
No, I definitely.
Yeah, no, we're definitely talking.
The metal.
For sure.
But how does a software company that's been doing this a little while view the cloud and big data?
Yeah, it's two segments there that are a little different. But first, in terms of SAP from a big data perspective, I think we heard in some of the other panelists talking about data becoming information that's actionable. And from an SAP perspective, before it was called big data, it was business intelligence, right? And it was about making data actionable. And yet, even with the best of efforts that we had done over decades, literally, we had certain things that you run overnight. There's certain things that run the weekend, right? And that's not serving business today. That doesn't meet the need. Maybe in some cases it does, but for the most part it doesn't. And so when this HANA experiment that came out a little over a year ago, that activity, with an in-memory database, with a columnar store, and all sorts of really incredible tools, but like you said, bare metal type stuff, allowed things that were running overnight to be done in 3 seconds, right? or less than a second. 1,000-fold increases in performance regularly without much effort. And then doing that makes you look at your data very differently, right? So, and from our perspective and from our customers' perspective, we're really getting very different questions than we've gotten in our entire company history, right? Because it was about compliance and that, you know, this is the system of record and all of that. And now it's like, make sure I don't miss that opportunity that I only have 2 hours to potentially take. I better not miss that. I expect your software to make that happen for me.
Is there any plans to put HANA on the cloud?
Yes.
When?
So for instance, from a development point of view, you can run it on AWS today.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, we have, I mean, my little team is working with, 100 startups that are doing exactly that, but there's much more going on than just that. But that is from a development point of view.
Mm-hmm. Can anyone go and download that?
Well, so you can sign up for it. Yeah,
Oh.
It's free development environment. Yeah, that's SAP. Everyone knows that. Free, right? That is how it works for development for HANA, because it's a platform. We want everybody to, and the people are doing things with it that I'm sure we never thought of, and it's really cool. Mm-hmm. But where does the cloud fit into all of this? Well, first off, I mean, SAP has spent a few $1 billion making sure we're in the cloud just in the last 2 years, in terms of buying companies. All right, so we absolutely have seen that while all the things that people bought SAP for decades are still true, the consumption model is mm-hmm. absolutely changing. And the expectation is absolutely changing. And so, we did it first with HR stuff. Now we're doing it with supplier-buyer networks. Mm-hmm. Those are things that clearly take advantage of cloud and accessibility and all that. And like I said, I think they dovetail together. And the only other thing I'll add, I loved your example, by the way, of the clicking around the web that was hardly a web at that point, but yet was still mind-blowing, right?
Well, links worked.
Yeah, Links was cool. But by the way, in '96, I was actually working for Netscape. So it's like but mobile is another one of those things, and I don't know. I think the jury's still out on mobile in terms of it's real enterprise fit, but in terms of requiring data to be in the cloud so it can get to the mobile device, and requiring the data to be actionable, because really all you've got is that little bit of landscape to say, I want to do this. That's another one that's sort of changing it all for us. Anyway, I'll shut up now.
So Damien, you have a database as well that a lot of people start out in the cloud using. What's driving people to reach for you, and what are they doing up there?
So yeah, it's really a game changer for a lot of startups. So our software is designed around elasticity, and it fits perfectly in with the cloud. It allows that you don't have to over-provision, you don't have to have a big capital investment to get started. You can prove your ideas, and when they start catching on, you won't suffer death by success, which is when all of a sudden it goes viral and you hit the hockey stick portion of your adoption curve. Now your infrastructure falls over, and everybody gets really frustrated and they move on. It allows that you can start off very cheaply and then very quickly add capacity. And for customers that already know what their capacity is ahead of time, so if you have a big established startup and you have a pretty good idea of the demand for your product and how many users you're going to have, it still has the high performance aspects, but you don't need the elasticity. But for startups where it's unproven and they're hoping to hit that part of the curve, this becomes a game changer for them. Now they can get started so much cheaper and really prove those ideas or disprove them very quickly.
So one of the other panels touched on the topic briefly, but the idea that data is hard to move. And when I talk to enterprise customers, they've got a lot of it sitting on SAP or in other operational systems on their premise in their data centers. And so typically they are leveraging external data in the cloud to bring it back to the mothership to process it, because the preponderance of the data is on their premises. Others, Michael, I know a lot of your customers, most of their data are up in the cloud already. Does the fact that data is hard to move present a barrier to the cloud? Does it present an opportunity once it's there? How does moving data around in the cloud gel together, or what are the challenges you have with that?
So I think it's it's a really important piece of the puzzle. I think that one thing I advise entrepreneurs is to think very hard about where you put your data, because I think Amazon has a sort of seductive pitch where you think, oh, it's just the Amazon cloud. It's Linux boxes, and we could easily migrate off of that, right? We'll just start here, and that won't be a big problem. And there's a reason why Amazon lets you push data in for free, but pushing it out costs something, right? It's like the Hotel California for your data. And it's data has weight. It has a gravitational pull to it. There's not a single person who's building a data center anywhere in the country that doesn't have to have a fast uplink to an Amazon data center, because either you or some of your partners have to talk in a fast way to Amazon's S3. So, I think, as far as, where the data is today and where it will be in the future, I think it'd be a mistake for people to think too much about on-premise data. The cloud services, for Metamarkets, for instance, our customers, we don't go in and say like, oh, we'll help you migrate the data in your back office servers up to the cloud. Because in terms of, the way that data is being generated, the data that already exists today, forget about how it gets created, is a very small fraction of the data that's going to be created in the next 5 to 10 years. And the vast majority of new data being generated is being generated by sensors, our mobile phones, our cash registers, our refrigerators that phone home and tell Whirlpool, how much energy they're using, the smart meters in our homes. This Internet of Things, right? This digital nervous system that's encircling the globe, that's where the new streams of data are coming from. And they're coming in real time, too.
Yeah.
To your point, it doesn't do you very good to understand that your house, your air conditioning isn't working, a day later, right? You kind of want to know about that on that hot summer day and fix it as it happens. So I think the data is already on. The data we care about is coming from sensors that are already hooked up to the cloud. And in fact, the bigger challenge will be not how do we get data on-premise to the cloud. The challenge will be those corporations or firms who have made a capital commitment to having on-premise infrastructure. How do they start pulling data that's in the cloud on-premise? And that will be a competitive Achilles heel for them.
One of the things that we're doing is we're actually rethinking the whole aspect of how do you reconfigure data to be more transportable, so it actually becomes an equation that you can compress. Because the challenge with transporting large amounts of data files is that it's raw data, when in fact that data can be described. And so there's some really innovative things we've been doing on our end to take advantage of the fact that, in talking about devices, that literally on a chip, you could actually start doing physical calculations on the physical data and then making it more transportable. I think that there's this old school thought of, I got this raw data and I'm going to transport from point A to B. And one of the things that we did is we sat back and said, how do we re-engineer our thinking around data? And that's fundamental to this equation because, as you're pointing out, there's this enormity of information. It's now going geometric. A few years ago it wasn't, but now it is. And we really need to think through when you design your system. Just don't think about, hey, I got this database, I'm going to put it over here. Because that's a huge mistake. Because as soon as you turn up and light up that cloud environment, and if you're doing it right, and you hit that hockey stick approach, you're going to have an enormous amount of information barreling in. And if you don't have the ability to manipulate and manage that as you're going hockey stick, you're screwed. And it's so painful. So when we started off in Infinigraph, we really, because I'd been through all that pain. I suffered on I don't want to tell you how bad we suffered. And I mean, failing, stuff falling over, breaking, just EMC arrays, it's horrible. So we really said, there's got to be a better way, and it came back down to let's rethink how we implement data, and that. So anyone in the crowd right now, if you're thinking about that, go to a drawing board, and really rethink your data, and you'd be surprised. And that's the problem why the data scientists right now are so friggin' expensive, right? Because it's not as simple like hey, I'm just going to pull some SQL queries, and these are like hardcore stuff. So
yeah, a big problem with that is if you do want to migrate off, how do you deal with the fact that you have active data, active mutations to a data set at the same time you want to migrate it off? Are you going to have to suffer through downtime? Are you going to lose people's data? And these are things that you might not be able to work around once you've already got your infrastructure in place without just cutting off the application and shutting it down for a while the migration happens. But ideally, you want to be able to migrate it while there's live edits happening, while the application is still live. If you can't do that, then you're basically stuck. You're either stuck on whatever cloud provider you're using, or you're going to have a huge amount of pain during that migration where nobody can access anything. It's a big problem.
we call that blackout.
So David, SAP holds a lot of the treasured data of an enterprise, and on the one hand, there's a lot of new data out there, and I'll, for the sake of argument, assume everybody agrees that we get more power when we combine data and have a richer view of reality. So is HANA a way to get the outside data into SAP? Is it a way to get the SAP data out, or yes?
Well, a couple things. There's some comments that were made I want to kind of challenge or at least extend a little bit, and then I'll get back into that because I think they are definitely related. That sensor data, say like the meter, the smart meter, so PG&E, let's use some local folks, right? 5 million residential, every 15 minutes data. That data doesn't go to the cloud. Yes, it utilizes the cloud, it utilizes internet, but it doesn't go to the cloud, it goes to PG&E. Mm-hmm. It actually goes on premise. So it starts there.
But it shouldn't.
But see, the thing is that
that's
they
the problem.
own...
That's a problem for PG&E, and that's why they do it every 15 minutes and not every minute, because they can't handle the frequency.
So I agree with you, but at the same time, it's their data.
Sure.
And then a piece of it is your personal data, right? Because it's your air conditioner that's consuming it, right? So you want to be able to get it back, and your expectation is that you want yours, right? But it's their data. And then if you start to really expand that story of the Internet of Things, it's like, okay, your energy data is gas and electric, there's weather data, there's government data, there's census data. All of those things actually have a role to play inside PG&E and out in the world with the rest of it, right? And I keep using PG&E. I know nothing about how PG&E operates, so I shouldn't say it that way. But putting the data where it can be worked on is really the key. And from a HANA perspective, one of the breakthroughs was when we sort of realized that you had your operational data store, right, that you were figuring stuff out on, and you had your transactional data store that you were recording it all in, and you would move it back and forth. And HANA, at least in certain configurations, allows you to put it in one place, record the transaction, and then without any pre-aggregation or anything, significant, because it's all up in memory anyway, you can then interrogate that data. That's putting the data together and actually not caring whether or not it's SAP data or data from the meter, right? And again, if you're not putting it in lots of different silos, but you're loading it into these centralized areas, which I know people want in the cloud, but wherever you put it, when you start to put it together, all of a sudden things become much more reasonable to try to do, right? Now, to the point of whether or not it makes SAP's had APIs for decades in terms of trying to get the data out. Granted, sometimes a little complex. But the data, you could get the data out, but what do you do with it, right? And I think that the tooling that we're starting to see now, and it's not just a HANA thing, I think there's a lot of great things coming along, is really allowing us to tackle that problem. The API evolution, the idea that systems start there, more modern systems start there, is an absolute requirement for us to do this big data thing right. And I think, I think it does end up in the cloud. We just need to recognize that it's a hybrid cloud for quite some time, right? Because it goes in and out of the enterprise and crosses.
The PG&E example is interesting because as smart grid was gaining traction, Google came out and said, that's people's electricity consumption data, right? It should be theirs, it should be free to them, and we should all benefit from being able to analyze power consumption. And yet, it costs tens of millions of dollars of capital to install those meters, which PG&E doesn't mind because the way that a regulated utility makes money is by reasonable rates of return on capital expenses. So but as appealing as cloud is to startups, it's unappealing to a regulated utility for that same reason.
I bet you they did want big data when that pipeline blew up.
Well, in data discovery, and how do we find that unstructured data that contained the description of those?
They needed that information back.
They did.
But I mean, that is a great example, though. I mean, it's not that the data didn't exist. It was that the data was not in any mode that you could get at it, right? That you could predict from it, that you could do something from it, or even, once it happened, say, well, that's why it happened, right? It took them,
That was ridiculous.
Too long, right? And any company that has to deal with compliance and risk and all of that has to realize that they got to get this stuff actionable. They've got to figure out how to get it.
If they just had a box big enough to put all of that data into, they would have been fine.
They should work out a deal with the cloud and give them cheap electricity so that they can use their services. So I want to open it up for some audience questions. It's been an interesting talk, but I also want to make sure that we give folks a chance to hear what they want to hear. So who out there has a question?
Okay.
There we go. You got a microphone coming.
Okay.
When we look at the culture of a large enterprise, they don't want to necessarily be totally transparent with their information or their data because of legal reasons. And the example of Germany and its policy of keeping that privacy, when do we see the future of it changing in our culture? Will that change in the enterprise's methodology of being transparent? Because they don't want everyone to know about their dirty laundry.
Well, I think actually the data privacy one, the first few times I heard it, I kind of was like, yeah, but I've grown up with this whole internet thing, I'm good. But then even as individuals, as we think about Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, whatever, that's our information. And when I give it to a company, I expect them to protect it, right? And so, somebody may make the case that information should be free, that it should be available. But I think actually, as a customer of that enterprise, I actually don't want my data free, right? So I think there are things that ought to be able to be kept by the large enterprise. I don't think the culture has to change that much. What I think has to change, or what I think should change from an efficiency point of view, is to recognize that not every step of the stack do they need to control to still be able to protect those assets that they want to protect.
So that tells me that the data is a tangible asset.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yes.
So therefore, the original source is the legal owner or holds it at a period of time.
That's a huge problem.
Yeah, that's a huge problem.
So, I mean, I'll give an example from the healthcare world, right? We all know that patient data, if used in the right way, could be incredibly valuable for understanding, the roots of disease. And it's extremely frustrating. My wife is a cancer surgeon down here in Palo Alto. It's very difficult for her to do retrospective studies of ovarian cancer because of all of the friction around getting patient records. Now, can you imagine who is most incented to want us to get easy access to patient records about ovarian cancer? The patients themselves, the families of those patients. So I think there's a movement here. If we get the ownership issue right, I think you'll see more and more in places where we should have the right to give our data up, right? If we're patients, we should say, I would love to be a part of a longitudinal study of some disease that runs in my family. But the issue is now we don't even have the technology set up to allow, for instance, patients to get good access of their own data. I think that will shift, but I think you're onto something when you say, who's the owner of the data? It should be us. We should have more rights around our own data and rights to do good with it, not just, for credit card companies to advertise to us.
Hey, I just want to poll everybody. Does anyone know a company called LexisNexis? So, it's really interesting that we, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, this is a new thing. It's a publicly facing, but in reality, and I had the unique opportunity to go and see some stuff that was actually shocking. I had no idea, but the amount of information that's being stored on us is staggering and for sale. Mm-hmm. And, so I realized at that point in time that the privacy element was a true red herring. Because when you see what LexisNexis is a very quiet and extremely government-protected entity. You can't touch them. But we're so enamored with, oh, God, there's tweets out there, and, my Facebook profile, it's got this on it. And it's such a joke. And because the real juicy stuff is stored in LexisNexis databases.
Can you characterize some of
I actually had to sign some really weird documents that were beyond an NDA.
That said you would never talk about it in a panel.
No, I can mention I was there and say scary things, but I can't mention what I actually saw, like the physical. I cannot tell you like the screens I saw and how they cross-connect data. I cannot say that.
Well, and one way to, if we want to expose our data as an enterprise or as people to the rest of the world, right, to support medical research, to as a retailer who wants to give information back to their suppliers so their suppliers can better provide them with products that sell on their shelves, the cloud presents a nice way to do that. You can expose some data without a hard link to your back-end system, right? So that privacy and security problem gets turned on its head when you actively want to share data, when you want people to find it, and when you want it to be discoverable. The cloud is an interesting place to do it. One of the most interesting differences between what you can get on Amazon and what you can get from Azure, for instance, is that Azure makes a very explicit data market available, and they're actively trying to make data discoverable on their cloud and make it very, very convenient to use it in applications. And I think that's very, very smart. Amazon, on the other hand, has a lot of data there, and there's a lot of public data there, but they don't make a big deal out of that. They don't market around it, right? They aren't explicitly making it standardized in ways that you can access it. So it's a difference in approach that I think reflects a different attitude towards data, but I think the cloud's an interesting place to expose that data to the larger public so that we can make those discoveries. You see Mayo Clinic, right, famously exposing all kinds of patients' histories for a fee to other people who want to benefit from that, the insight that can be gleaned from it.
The reason why I asked and brought it up is because once it becomes an issue of property and getting past the free tools for your property, in that exchange, I'll take the free tools and you can have everything around. But now I want to negotiate with you to give you the information, then that's when the currency of data comes about. And
I like that business.
I have a question, kind of a evolutionary technology versus brand mindshare question on Hadoop. So I'm looking for just a smattering of some short answers. So over the last couple of years, I've worked with some various entrepreneurs who are using Hadoop in different parts of the stack to solve different technology problems. And clearly Hadoop had its origins with on-premise data centers and doing in-house stuff. Now we see this move to private, public, and hybrid clouds, right? And you see various vendors packaging Hadoop with databases, with management stuff. So it's like Hadoop plus. It's like some sandwich layer. So if you roll forward 5 years, I'd like to hear each of your quick opinions. Does a Hadoop evolve into both a paradigm and an execution engine that services all these needs, or do we actually see new solutions emerge that are, not quite key value store architected for their original data center solution? Do we see new programming, execution, and compute distribution technologies evolve to fill this new cloud environment?
What is this Hadoop thing he's talking about?
So maybe we'll start with
What's a Hadoop?
Sorry. I mean, real quick, I think we see new things. I think Hadoop is great, but I think Hadoop is not a runtime execution. I think when you want to make data actionable, I shouldn't write off a whole bunch. There's a whole bunch of stuff you can do, but there's certain things that when you want to make data actionable, you want to execute logic against bits of the data in real time. And from there, make additional judgments and do additional crunching, right? And I think it's a different set of tools. I really do. I think that absolutely there's opportunity to also extend many of the different open source type solutions that do a good job with big data in various forms. But I do think there's a new set of things that we're starting to see.
Yeah, so with our product, we're very much about low latency, real-time access and analysis of the data. And there's a lot of things that Hadoop can do that we simply can't. But what we focus on is what we can do very quickly. So I see on one end of the spectrum you have heavy analytics, which are batch-oriented and can do very deep analysis of your data. And on the other end, you have things that are more real-time and perhaps can't do as deep analysis or might even miss some important things, but it's more important that you get it very quickly. So the point of that is that Hadoop is definitely not going to be the only solution for analytics. As he mentions, it's really more kind of batch-oriented and slow, but it does very powerful things. And one of the really powerful things about Hadoop isn't so much the technology, it's this huge community that's growing up around it. And but fundamentally, they're coming from one end of the spectrum, which is deep analytics, and they're constantly trying to make that faster. And then there's another end where you can come from, which is let's do what we can do fast as possible, but not worry about how deep we can analyze it. So yeah, there's definitely kind of a dichotomy of the two approaches.
Yeah, I think it's like look at the progression with where Linux came from, and the fact that Red Hat was born. And so I think we're going to see a very similar progression in the same vein.
Yeah, I would say I agree with Damien. There's that book by Daniel Kahneman called Thinking Fast and Slow, and I recently was thinking about data analytics, fast and slow. I think there's really just two speeds of data, and Hadoop is the slow, complex analytics, and in-memory computing, like HANA, like our product, like yours, is fast, instantaneous. And I think people in the middle are going to be squeezed out.
Hear, hear.
More in memory.
All right. Well, we've reached our time, and I want to thank the panel. It's been a great conversation. I know I've learned a lot. I hope everybody else has too. And with that, I will be turning it back to my good friend John Mack to lead the next discussion.